welcome to the Dragon Con Skeptic Track. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so this is an amazing panel. So how many have seen the movie Argo? Yes, of course you have, because it's an amazing movie. These are the folks that were involved. So I'm without, huh? Yeah, okay, so they're not even in disguise. This is what they look like. So this is Nick Eftimiades and Jonna Mendez, and Jamy Swiss was not actually in the movie.
I was involved to the degree that I've seen it several times.
He's seen it several times, so he considers himself an expert. So, okay, so I'm going to head to you, Jonna, since you are probably, y'all are all close. So talk to us about this movie. What did they get right? What did they get wrong?
Well, first of all, we're going to be bouncing this thing around up here. Nick and
y'all up and letting you
Nick and I are going to be. We haven't really had this conversation. You're going to get a very fresh presentation from us today. I hope you like it. The movie Argo. When I flew on United the last time to California, this was 2 weeks ago. They had the movie Argo on the entertainment thing on the back of the seat. And I chose it as a test because I've seen it so many times that I think I know the dialogue perfectly. And so what I did is I declined the earphones and I just had it on the back seat. And I was mouthing the dialogue the whole way through, and I only missed a couple of words. I bet I've seen it 100 times. I'm not kidding, with all kinds of people.
So what did they get right and what did they get wrong?
I'm going to interrupt.
Do it.
And let Jonna get to that, because that's everybody's question, right? And I think we're going to ask Nick to sort of outline what the operation was, because I avoided talking about it in my talk. How many were at my talk, by the way? Good, because you saw the images that we don't have here today. And but I've talked about it, and I avoided talking about it. Jonna avoided talking about it so that we could concentrate the whole thing today. So I think Nick can outline the original events, right, that led to the real story.
But let me just point out one thing. There are two Argos. There is a movie, and there is a book. And while they're telling the same story, they do not match up at certain points. And that'll be a fun thing to have a conversation about.
And, being that this was immersed in secrecy and such, and, life's compartmented in the agency, even yesterday, Jonna told me something I didn't know. I mean, I knew one other participant in it, Johnson, who we'll talk about, but I didn't know about the correction that he made to the documents that it went through, which is why we had a Farsi expert, working on this project. Hey, if I could show a couple of slides, let me just give you a lead-in for exactly what happened. So in 1979, we have the Iranian Revolution taking place, right? Ayatollah Khomeini came in, threw out the Shah, the U.S.-backed Shah, okay, for quite some period of time, and it was a very violent revolution that came upon. This was actually the embassy security officer that was taken out in front of the embassy as what they're calling students, revolutionaries, took over the U.S. embassy. Now, give you a little context. This guy had been taken out before in the exact same way, stood in front of the streets, and then marched him back and let him go. It wasn't unusual. Inside that same embassy, there was actually a sign up that said, "No weapons allowed in the cafeteria," right? Because there were revolutionaries walking around inside the embassy for months before. They had partial control, and but they weren't allowed to bring, and they were walking around with AKs inside the embassy. And when some of the hostages, when they got out, and when they talked about this when they first got to the embassy, and said they couldn't believe it, that there were Iranian nationals walking around inside the embassy with automatic weapons. But such is the State Department. So.
Yes. We agree on that.
Yeah, we have views on that type of thing. So I'll just go through one or two slides just to frame the context. So on November 4th, 1979, that embassy is actually attacked and for lack of a better term, overthrown. We get reporting out of it, crazy, about as this is occurring. One guy is talking about, the first thing that they go for is the liquor, literally. And they're raiding the embassy stores and stuff like that. But the embassy is overrun by militants. We wind up with 52, actually it was 66 hostages. at the time. Two groups escaped. They saw what was going on, and it's a big compound, right? So they see what's going on. Two groups escape, and they actually have a little bit of a disagreement which way to go. 6 of them follow the DCM going one direction, the Deputy Chief of Mission, and the other 6 go another direction. The 6 that followed the Deputy Chief of Mission get wrapped up. They take a wrong turn, and they're grabbed by revolutionaries, and they're dragged back into the embassy. There was also one additional American civilian who was just trying to renew a visa, get an exit visa to go out, had nothing to do with the events, who got wrapped up in this. Just to let you know, it turns out 10 days later, he appears, 10 days? I think it was 10 days, maybe a little later. He appears on Walter Cronkite talking about how there's 6 Americans who weren't wrapped up, who weren't caught, and they're on the run in Tehran. So it's not a great situation.
Wow.
So just to frame this, these people are on the run. They're on the run for 6 days, as you can see. They start out going to the British embassy, then they go to one person, Anders, Robert Anders. They go to his apartment. Now, they can't stay at apartments, even though people are prisoners inside the embassy. Their apartments are open because the Iranian militants have the list of, who's in the embassy and who's not.
Yeah, they're inside the files now. They can get out all the information.
Right. So, if you show up, if you're staying at a person's apartment and the lights are going on and off at night, or the maids that come in, the cleaning staff or something, see you in there, it's going to get back. So they stay a night, they move, and they move at night, right? So they're on the run, and they know they're being hunted at this point. They go to the British residential compound. They're actually asked to leave because they're under pressure. They wind up calling a Canadian immigration officer, John Shearden, and they say, hey, we're in trouble. There's 6 of us here. And he says, come on over. So they literally drive over. He has the garage door open. They pull right in. The door shuts. And at least for the moment, they feel that they're safe.
Let me make a comment. He said, what took you so long?
Yeah.
And he didn't say, hold one while I check with my ambassador, which would be the normal response. He said, this is the beginning of the Canadian piece of the story of Argo. He said, come on over. And what took you so long? Come on. And saved him.
And that's a big point. It might not seem it, but it's a really big point because what becomes so risky for the Canadians in this is their level of commitment. Right? So he shows up at Shearden's house, and the ambassador, Ken Taylor, is there. Now, if the ambassador wasn't there, you could always pawn it off on an overzealous foreign service officer, right? Well, he shouldn't have done that. Hey, this and that. But the ambassador's there, which is Canada's full commitment, to supporting the U.S. in this. This is a diplomatic world, right? Their full commitment to supporting the U.S. in this, and a full slap in the face to the Iranians if they find out. Right? If they, no, wait a minute, the ambassador was there. What the heck is going on?
They're taking a huge risk.
Right, and that risk gets more intensified as we go on in time. Okay, so I'll leave it on that as we talk. But this is Tony, who was my boss, and I guess at points your boss before
At that
things
point,
happened.
he was my boss too. He was not my husband. He became my husband much later. It has nothing to do with Argo. But, if we had planned to set this thing up, I'm just saying, we couldn't have done it better. That's a beautiful.
Yeah, it was great. Perfect.
Laying the thing
I
down.
have the best seat in the house. I'm not going to lie.
So, one of the first things that I always call out is the fact that State Department understood from day one what was going on, and they also understood the severity of this situation, and that we had basically a hostage situation, and that we're going to need to move out smartly. So you know what they did? They sent a memorandum to the CIA, and we were across the street from them. 23rd Street in D.C. divides State Department and our old office.
Okay, no. Our old office.
Our old office. We're not there anymore. But somebody could have walked it across the street. They did not.
Right.
They could have sent it electronically, and they didn't do that either. They put it into one of those yellow manila envelopes with the string that ties up and stuck it in a slot, sending it to the CIA. I think it took like 4 or 5 days to get to us. this thing that was going to turn into just this crisis situation.
Right.
So when Tony got that, he said that at CIA in the main building, this is about as close to a wartime footing that he ever saw. People were just, it was like a beehive. They were just buzzing. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, there was nothing to be done. This was Jimmy Carter's administration. Carter was a very cautious man. The Ayatollah over there was not a cautious man at all. The students had no idea initially that they were going to succeed, and they didn't really know how to move forward. We did an event at the International Spy Museum, and we talked about Argo some years ago, and we had some senior government officials in the audience. And one of them said from the stage, well, you know, they weren't actually armed when they came over the walls. And this kid to me, shot up in the audience and he said, sir, excuse me, sir, I was a Marine Guard there. They were armed, sir. And off we went, having the conversation. The dilemma was that there was no one to talk to. There was no one to negotiate with. Those students, they didn't want to sit down at a table. They wanted to burn the damn table down. That was their goal. The Ayatollah was happy to turn this thing loose. There was no diplomatic place to go.
Right.
So you have to start looking at options. Tony came out of, we worked together all these years. You were in graphics.
Right.
Tony came out of graphics, but now he was the head of our joint office. I'm disguised, you're graphics. Tony's up there like, you have an idea? And Tony actually had an idea. And I don't know.
Well, before, just to add a little context to this, we had a failed raid, a military raid, by Charlie Beckwith, right? When the desert helicopters crashed. New helicopters supposedly designed for stealth, but crashed. So the U.S. suffers the ultimate humiliation in this. So that makes it even more tenuous.
And I don't know if you know this. I don't know if he knows this. But Tony had been in 6 months before and had rescued another Iranian, an Iranian who was a member of the Shah's Savak. Savak was a dreadful organization. But this guy was our
intelligence organization.
He was our intelligence source reporting to us on what was going on with the Shah. Tony went in and rescued this guy, exfiltrated him. Tony Mendez says that was the more dangerous of these operations because they would have shot that guy on sight at the airport.
Yeah.
And they would have shot Tony too. I think part of that story is in the book Argo. So Tony had to come up with a scenario. How in the world are you going to get somebody out? And I don't know if you know this, but he was at home and his wife at the time, Karen, who I knew very well, she was an interior decorator. She didn't know anything about what Tony did. I mean, she knew what he did, but she didn't know any details. And they're sitting home one evening when this is going on, having drinks, and she said, you know what? What you need to do to end this is to kill the Shah. The wife said to her husband, kill the Shah. She didn't mean actually kill him. She meant make it appear that the Shah had died. Do you know this story?
No, I do not.
All right, here we go.
None of us do. Tell us this
So
story.
I'm at a I'm in India at the time. I'm home for a conference. It was an all hands, everybody conference. Had nothing to do with Argo. And I said, where are my disguise guys? Where's Roy? Where's Bob? Where are those guys? Oh, they're working on a special project. What they were working on was making a fake dead Shah. A double. And the idea was they were going to present it, and they did present it to President Carter. They presented two Shahs, a live one and a dead one. And he could exit the country any way you wanted, but one of them came in on a litter in the uniform, because we had
a ton of that from his plane even.
In a uniform with a mask. It was the Shah of Iran dead on a stretcher into the Oval Office, and the second one walked through the door in his uniform with the epaulets and the sash and all the stuff. And Carter said no. He said, no, that's too risky. And I have to, I pin a little bit of guilt on Carter because there was an election coming up, and he was extremely aware of that election coming up. It's partly why the helicopters crashed. When they went in and did that raid and tried to, he delayed and delayed. There was a window, and it had to do with sandstorms.
Right.
And if you go past this date, those helicopters are going to be at risk because they can't fly through those sandstorms that are predictable.
For those who don't know, like, interest rates were 18% at the time, so he was facing a lot. They really were. I mean, the economy was in that condition.
Here we go. These are the details.
Yeah, so he was facing, all that is impacting his decision, okay?
When those helicopters went down and they were refueling and they crashed and people died, and it was tragic. But we had ready at that time trucks that we had disguised as Iranian military trucks, because you don't just disguise people, you disguise things. We had uniforms that we had made that were Iranian military uniforms. We were prepared to have, I forget if it was Navy SEALs.
Oh, yeah.
Military group was prepared to go in, staging at an outdoor football field. They were going to go into the embassy and just go in and get those hostages out. But when the planes crashed, that was over.
Yeah. So when you ask them, how are you going to get out? Don't worry, just get us in. We'll get out.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Put the bravado aside. Let's figure this out.
You
should also say that the pressure on the president here. It's not only the CIA who is ultimately even asked for solutions, but the State Department's pushing for certain things, even in negotiations. The ambassadors who ultimately know about what's going on, the Western ambassadors, saying, look, lay low, this isn't going to last forever. At some point, we'll all circle the extra hostages when ones are released, and ones were released, 10 or so were released that Thanksgiving.
Some women.
Yeah, women, and they said, minorities, yep. And they said, let's circle them, and we'll walk them into the embassy, all with a ring of ambassadors around them. We'll walk them over to the airport at the same time. And then there's also the hostages, right? So there's a lot of different pressures. Hey, get us out. What's the deal here? All this different pressure hitting, and all that stuff is never said in a clear manner. So there's all push in different directions.
What kind of the next step was, Tony was flying out to California, where he had deep connections in Hollywood. They kind of became useful. And he remembered, he made a phone call to John Chambers. The makeup guy.
And Bob Seidel?
And Bob Seidel. But he started with Chambers, and he said, John, how many members in a location scouting party? And John said, 6 to 8. Tony said, what would their titles be? And he kind of peeled them off. The production manager, the finance, the logistics guy, the script writer. Tony said, okay, 6 or 8. He's trying to figure out how can you cover 6 painfully American English-speaking people that are going to show up in Iran in the middle of a revolution. And he said, Hollywood. They're idiots. They're crazy. They'll go anywhere to make.
And that was literally the thing. Who would be the only people crazy enough to go do that? Think that they were above the revolution?
Yeah.
Oh, must be Hollywood.
Yeah.
Let's use them.
Yeah. And so it began. Now I have to tell you, there's a funny little thing here that I just learned. They ended up setting up a production company. Michael Douglas moved out of some real estate. Tony Mendez and Studio 6, they called it, moved in. They called it Studio 6 because they're going to go rescue 6 people, and my husband had a fabulous sense of humor. They got the phones, thanks to Chambers, they got phones put in. You'd normally wait months. Everything happened because Chambers, an Oscar-winning makeup guy, made it happen. So they're all set up. Here's the new piece that I just learned, and it's so cool. Tony died 5.5 years ago. I'm still going through things. I'm going through some plastic box, and I found an envelope in there addressed to him. It was never opened. It came in the mail, and I looked at the return address. I didn't recognize it, but the man's name had IMDb, a number next to him. IMDb, he's connected with Hollywood movie making. So I sat down. If I had had a cigarette, if I'd been smoking, I would have lit it, but I quit, so I didn't. I opened it up and said, Dear Mr. Mendez, you don't know me, But I worked at Studio 6 in Hollywood for a certain period of time. I worked for Mr. Chambers. I worked with Bob Seidel. I worked with these people. He said, and then one day, Mr. Mendez, while I was working, doing some artwork, he was an artist, doing some artwork for this location scouting party, which was the cover.
Right.
So he said, a man came to the office with a briefcase, wearing a suit and tie, and he opened the briefcase on Bob Seidel's desk, and it was full of money. And he said, I just want to ask you, Mr. Mendez, was that you? He said, I went to Mr. Chambers when he left, and I said, John, is this legal? Is this legal what we're doing? He thought it was like maybe a drug thing.
That's hysterical.
He didn't know, but it was looking pretty shady to him. The pity is that we never opened the envelope and never wrote back to him, and I still have never, I lost the envelope. I haven't written back to him ever. But that's kind of what it looked like.
So just to...
Was that Tony with the briefcase?
No, it was not, but it was a CIA guy who
CIA
Tony had
guy.
sent. It was $10,000 in cash, and Tony doesn't go carrying cash around in suitcases. You get someone to do that for you.
So let's frame this to bring you up to exactly where we are. Tony goes, he also went to the Canadians to start to talk about this
there's
and say,
all kinds of
right, so
stuff
this,
going on
a
now.
lot of this, hey, is this going to be okay? Because they need Canadian passports to do this. You can't do this on American passports, right?
And countries do not give up passports.
No.
That's something that flies by in the movie, sort of like, oh, okay, we'll get the passports.
The
This
United
is at the highest levels.
The United
Nations
States
do not do this.
The United
Except-
States would
actually, could you
never
just
free
show
up
this?
passports.
Yeah, except in this case, when Canada, when their parliament holds a secret session, which is not something that they've done since World War II at that time. And not only that, but after the fact, they keep their mouths shut, which is amazing. Right?
That's amazing.
And, no, it really is. I mean, the entire parliament doesn't say anything. And they approve having these people, plus Tony and others of the CIA, have Canadian passports. So, I mean, things are really rolling when all these parts that are going on between Washington and Tony setting up this this fake production company, all the artwork that goes behind it, which if you can bring up, you'll see the Tony did that, did he not? The movie poster?
That was in Variety and Hollywood Reporter.
Right. And so they're advertising these things, as in ads and articles that we're going to have this movie. Yeah, the script, and even Steven Spielberg sent in
Yes, he did.
Requesting information. Agents were contacting them on behalf of people. So this is real.
Bob Seidel got a script. I mean, they got like 26
Right.
scripts. This is what they do in L.A. My cousin wrote a script here. Read it. He got a script. He liked it so much he started taking meetings. The Bob Seidel, who was running our office, kind of got lost in it, and he was meeting with people about a real script that they wanted to produce.
Bob, you realize we're not doing this, right?
That's called living your cover.
Yeah.
How do people keep their secrets? That's amazing.
So the question is, how many people actually knew? I don't know the answer to that either. How many people in that office space? Because I know a lot of Chambers relatives and stuff, and a lot were hired. How many people, other than Chambers, Seidel, and Kirby, actually knew that it was a CIA front?
I would guess that they kept it pretty tight because
Yeah.
Chambers had a confidential
Non-disclosure agreement.
non-disclosure secrecy agreement with CIA. He did work for us, and he understood what was going on. Seidel, I'm pretty sure that
I think he
they-
actually did my toupee, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but you just
Back in
said
the
the
day.
Canadian Parliament kept a secret.
I know.
That's
There are a lot of
astounding.
moving parts. It has to be done quickly, too.
That's absolutely
I'm sorry, very
astounding.
polite.
I think
country.
before we
They apologize. the
Before
whole
we
time.
proceed, I have a feeling that we need to introduce Nick just a little more thoroughly because you were involved in a part of this that I had nothing to do with, and I don't know about it. You were in our graphics section. You were responsible for those documents and the accuracy and the...
So there's, and as you can see up here, you can give a person a fake passport, but have you ever, what happens if you give 6 people blank passports? Even if they look real, and they are real, basically, for all time. What happens if they're all blank? Really? You all just got the passport at one time and blank? It's a flag you don't want to raise. So lots of things have to be done, not the least of which is they have to be back stamped with all these cachets from other countries showing previous travel. Everything's got to be correct.
Which you guys made.
Well, yeah.
They're all
You allowed to
fake.
say that?
They're all
Yeah,
fake.
no, actually, yes. But you had to have CIA officers traveling, you had to have people traveling all over to get these things stamped, and we had to go back and look at old cachets because they change over time, and you'll see different things written in for different people who work different shifts, right? So all that has to be done accurately, which is why, like, I'm a Chinese linguist, which is why, and the other person involved on this, Bob Johnson, who is a Farsi linguist, right? Why you pick people like that? Because they can read everything on it and say, oh, wait a minute, this actually is the guy's name who came on duty at that time. So all that has to be perfect as you put back travel on these passports. Then, not only that, how many of you have traveled overseas? Okay. How many of you have traveled with just a passport and nothing else?
No one.
No. So you need credit cards, you need a driver's license, you need, if you're a doctor in a doctor's association, whatever, you need all these things in that name. Your credit cards have to work. How do you manage that?
It's called pocket litter.
Right.
It's
We
the
call it
stuff we all
pocket
carry
litter.
around.
But you can't just print up you can't just stamp a fake credit card. That actually has to be real. So now think about all the people who know, as you're working all these arrangements with banks and law firms and just, credit card companies and things like that. So it's pretty extensive, even for a case like 6 people. I mean, hundreds of people they don't know what's going on, but they have some aspect of hey, we're asked to provide this in this name Eftimiades and blah, blah, blah. So
I thought it was interesting that, bear in mind, a lot of these documents that have to be fabricated are Canadian documents because this is supposed to be a Canadian film crew. And the thing that interested me was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The guys on the horses,
Yeah.
it's the only way I think of them, are also very involved in like issuing driver's licenses and
Right.
the rest of the stuff in Canada. We were reaching into pockets of Canadian bureaucracy that were stunning.
As a skeptic, this is also one of the
Here
strongest
we go.
arguments I ever make against, the aliens are in, this and that. Look, for something like this, hundreds of people in offices in multiple countries, were involved, okay? Aliens? Really? You're talking thousands.
You have
You're
to even
talking
be able
just,
to say the name of this town right.
Yeah, yeah.
If you say Toronto
Right.
versus Toronto,
Yeah, that
So,
was,
really,
that's true.
thousands of people know about this, but no one says anything.
wow.
Yeah, no. So, but you told me something about this I didn't know.
There was a mistake.
Yeah.
There was a mistake in documents coming out of Canada, and it's testy even today who made the mistake. It actually doesn't matter because the mistake was caught and it was fixed. And it was fixed by the linguist that is in the book Argo, but not in the movie. In the movie, they took him out. They thought it was going to confuse you guys. Too many people, too many faces. So they removed him, and it's just Tony Mendez up there on his very own. There was another story about the linguist because they arrived in Tehran, and they have a map produced by the CIA of Tehran where things are. Evidently, the Iranians didn't have a good map going on. So they're there.
Oh, yeah, I
They
heard
took a
this.
taxi to go to the Canadian embassy, and they end up not at the Canadian embassy, but across the street from the American embassy that is under siege, and where all of our colleagues are God knows, in a cellar tied up, and the Iranian revolutionaries are all around with their guns. And one of them sees these 2 tourists across the street and walks across the street to Tony and Ed Johnson and said, "Can I help you?" in Iranian. And Ed spoke Farsi. He said, "Yeah, we're looking for the Canadian embassy." And the Revolutionary Guard called a taxi, put them in the taxi, spoke to the taxi driver, said they want to go to the Canadian embassy, and sent them on their way. Have a good trip. Adios.
Yeah, Ed actually just came out publicly 8 months ago, something like
Yeah,
that.
Ed has always been at arm's length with his story, and he just stepped forward.
Yeah, he's He's in his 80s and I guess having some issues, but his family, he didn't want to come. His family actually pushed him into it and said, Ed, you need to go to the agency and tell them
Confess.
to release your name.
Yeah.
And I guess he got an award. I just saw pictures of it. I wasn't actually.
He should have gotten an award.
Yeah. Okay, so they're there.
Oh, but
Tell us about.
there's one other piece of this that I think is kind of fun. And that was at the beginning. Remember, we're across the street from State Department. Our old office, not there anymore, so this is okay, and State Department. But back then, Tony and a couple of other people went to State Department because State was proposing that they were going to go rescue these 6 people. They are their people. They're State Department people, and they were going to go rescue them. But the fact was that they had no capability to do that. They wanted to do it, but we knew they couldn't pull it off. They don't have the skills, they don't have anything. Tony, who had just been in Iran and rescued somebody else, exfiltrated him, had this famous meeting with a bunch of State Department people. A woman ran it, a woman in stilettos, he said, and they were saying, okay, here's our plan. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. We're gonna send them in saying that they're I don't know, school teachers. The school was closed.
International school teachers.
Every idea that they had was ridiculous because it just wouldn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny.
Right.
So Tony made his famous one-line speech. Do you remember this speech?
Yep.
He said
Yeah.
exfiltrations. He's talking to State Department, to this woman in stilettos, the gray suit. He said exfiltrations are like abortions. You don't want one until you need one and something's gone wrong. If you need one, we can give you a nice clean job. And I heard that and I thought, oh my God, did he actually say
That would
that
have been Tony, all right.
in the State Department? But he did, and evidently there was a shock value to it, and they left that meeting with the responsibility to go save these 6 people. State Department was out of it. They were going to go save the people. That was a moment.
So when Tony and Ed showed up, ultimately, and remember that they had to go to multiple countries, get Iranian visas, those had to be reproduced by the agency so that, they could be forged for the other 6 that were already there, right? So they get this stuff, and the stuff is shipped to the Canadian Embassy, which is a change from the movie, because the movie shows Tony doing the type of artwork, the forging of signatures and stuff inside the hotel room, but it was done actually in the ambassador's office. So they talk to the hostages or to the people who, hey, American officials here. They actually identified themselves as CIA and explain the plan. You tell me when I'm going wrong, Jonna. I'm abbreviating a bit, but they actually explain what the plan is, and then they left them all to kind of discuss it on their own.
Amongst themselves.
Yeah, amongst themselves.
And one
holdout
said no. And Tony said, must have been the smart one.
I had no idea, really.
It was Joe Stafford.
Yeah, I know it was Joe.
Joe knows that he said that. Must have been the smart one.
Well, and no one ever came out of there with the reason that he didn't want to go. But they said it was a personal reason, so he didn't want to know, unless you know.
So it was Tony. His job was to go in, evaluate them, to see if he thought they could carry this off. These were not trained intelligence professionals used to working in a fake name, because you have to learn your whole new life. You have to learn your father's name and his birth date and where he was born and stuff.
And your schools and all that. You
have to memorize all of that. Could they do that? That was the question. Tony had a couple of days to do that, to make that decision and to go. And one of the things that he did to convince them at the end, his job was to convince them, if he thought they could do it, to convince them that they were going to do it. And he was an amateur magician, and he showed them his famous trick.
Mark, do you have a camera?
Do it.
And I know that Jamy knows his trick, so we're gonna do the cork trick.
Can you put a camera on me?
Yep, it's on.
Oh, it's not here.
No, it's over there.
It's all.
So what Tony would have done is a classic thing, and this is what he did in the meeting, as Jonna has told me, was he had 2 solid corks, which cannot go through one another. They're just ordinary, genuine corks, and he said, we'll just get them out.
And Joe, the smart one, said, okay.
So I guess then everyone took to learning the legends, as it's called, your background, your history, your life, where you went to school, your new name, those types of things. I don't know how extensive, you would know that, how extensive was the disguise work on them?
It was not extensive. It wasn't even, you almost could say it wasn't disguised. It was a restyling of these people to a more Hollywood thing. I know that Bob Anders, the older one with silver hair, clearly the leader of this group, they didn't do anything to him, just taught him to just blow dry his hair straight back, and to unbutton his shirt like 4, and to put on too much cologne, and to swagger. He was the boss. And they kind of did that with all of them. He was a CEO, the senior person. The women had been in the visa line in the consulate and had been exposed to a lot of Iranians who trying to get out of that country to go to the United States. So they did more extensive with makeup and jewelry and hair, completely changed everything. Women, it's easier with women than it is with men. But as far as traditional disguise, there wasn't that much done.
Okay. So I guess after a day or two, or they had been doing practice, and someone from, if I remember correct, someone from the Canadian embassy who spoke Farsi, they actually did, which we did in the office 100 times, the fake visa line, where the fake immigration, so you're coming through and getting questioned, so you get used to getting peppered with questions. And they ran that through until people could pass, so to speak, right, with a Canadian official who spoke Farsi.
It's kind of a hostile interrogation.
Right.
Just to give them a sense of what they might encounter. They were told, Tony told them, we're a group, stay as a group, don't anybody go splintering off. We're gonna go through this whole thing. We are a group. And then they get to the airport, and the first thing Lee Schatz does, Lee was the addition kind of at the end. He didn't work in the consulate like the other 5 did. He was an agricultural
attaché
employee. So he had a different office across the street. He could see what was going on at the consulate.
To his credit, he had Washington on the phone, and was giving him a blow-by-blow of everything that was happening.
He was doing
while
that.
It was happening.
He was doing that. When it came time for him to move, he didn't move immediately with the others. He went to the Swedish embassy where he knew someone, and he slept for 2 nights on a sofa with the Swedish flag was his blanket. I wonder if he doesn't still have it. But when they got to the airport, he was nervous. He hadn't undergone quite the same intense drill that the others had, and so he shot ahead, and he got stopped at the immigration guy because his mustache, Lee had a huge mustache, and he had trimmed it, and there was a question, is that still you? It all worked out. It all worked out fine.
And just to add a little more context to this, as this situation is evolving, in the days and the weeks that Tony's setting up the company, the front, and all this type of stuff, the Canadian embassy is coming under increased scrutiny.
Yeah.
The ambassador's getting calls and actually identifying people by name. Have you seen this guy Lee Schatz? And the Canadian ambassador's denying everything. And going back to Canada, saying we need to start burning down the embassy now, reducing, start the procedures for document destruction and get people out of the country because the pressure is so intense and there's surveillance on the street looking at residences and things like that. So they know it's only a matter of time, and they don't want to be caught in a position where they have the Americans in their hands, right? So it's getting more and more dangerous as this is happening.
The Iranians were saying, if they had caught those 6 house guests, the fact that they had been hiding for all that time, the fact that they had been clandestine would have confirmed to those crazy, naive students that they were spies because they thought everybody was a spy. They just didn't know. And so the longer they were there, the more dangerous it got if they were caught. And the ambassador knew that. I mean, he shut down his embassy. He had that one fellow he had left. I can't remember his nickname. It was something like Smash, or he went around with a sledgehammer. He destroyed all their equipment, all their communications equipment, all their stuff. He just beat it down. He wasn't going to let the Iranians have it. But,
What we actually, the shredders in those days just did thin strips, right? The paper shredders. So I don't know if you can buy online. I did kind of in a hippie bookstore 30 years ago, but the Iranians put them all back together and glued it back, all the classified documents.
People didn't believe that. That was in the
Right.
movie, like these
pictures
kids
of
were
film,
doing
yeah.
it, yeah, and people said, oh, no, that's Hollywood. No, it wasn't. I think it was 11 volumes.
Yeah.
It was, it was the whole set of file material destroyed that they tried to destroy at the embassy.
So as I recall, at the airport, who is it? I don't know if it was Lee Schatz or someone, one of the Farsi speakers in the State Department picked up the newspaper.
That was Joe,
It was Joe.
yeah, the smart one.
Yeah. And so he's reading a Farsi newspaper as they're waiting, as the plane is delayed. So of course, the minute the plane's delayed, everyone has, first off, the question is, well, it's a delayed an hour. That means 4 hours, in your head. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard is going around telling people to open up bags. What they were actually looking for was artifacts, that were being stolen and taken out of the country. But you get this aggressive policing presence in there, and one of the smart American reading a Farsi newspaper for a guy who's only supposed to be there 2 days.
And,
So-
and these weren't the cadre of trained guards that would
Right.
normally be in an airport. These were young,
Okay, huh.
revolutionary kids with guns, with ammunition. And they could shoot at a moment's notice if they thought something was wrong. So it was a scary thing. It was a very scary thing.
Right. So ultimately, they get on the plane.
Yep.
Tony gets them out. They
Yep.
arrive in Switzerland.
Yep.
Right. First stop. And I heard the first thing that they said to Tony, well, from his, him saying that the first thing that they said to him when he arrived was, "Give us our passports back."
And the thing that Tony told me was that they got off the airplane in Zurich, and State Department, we have a love for State Department, but it's a very low-key love. State Department was there with some kind of a van to pick up the hostages, the house guests, the 6 of them. Tony said they drove up, put the 6 in the van, slammed the doors, took off. And Tony and Ed,
They're sitting there.
they're standing on the tarmac like, and I said, well, what'd you do? He said, well, we went and had lunch. The point kind of being that there are no thank yous,
Right.
very few kudos, not much recognition. Tony got some incredible award at CIA for what he did. He got it secretly. He got it at a date where no one, his family, could not come and witness it. They said, we're sorry about that, but it's going to be on this day. They gave him the award. They took it back.
They always do that. You know how many awards here it is, Nick, and all right, give it back.
And they put it in your file, and
Right.
maybe you see it when you.
have a lot of awards like that too.
And so, another just interesting piece to this was Tony retired eventually. We both retired. It was 19 years after this happened that George Tenet came to Tony and said, it was right before 9/11, he said, let's tell this story. My husband said, it's classified, George. George said, no, it's not. I just declassified it. And he actually directed Tony to the New York Times, where the CIA had made an interview. They wanted this story to be told. It's probably the only good story you will ever hear about the CIA. But George Tenet wanted it out there.
Here's something I heard President Carter say, and I had no idea about this, but this is what Carter said when he was asked, is there anything else you can tell us about this? And Carter said, yeah. There was actually 4 other CIA officers that came out of Tehran on their own and on German passports. And one of them gets called back by the immigration, and this is, you got to be able to think on your feet in something like this, and this is probably the best case I've ever seen of it. One of them gets called back by the Iranian immigration officer and says, I've been doing this for 20 years, and the Germans always spell out the middle name, and yours just has an initial, an H, and another screw up by someone, right? But, and the guy says, well, I got special permission to have my initial, not my name. And he goes, well, my parents named me after Hitler. So And really, yeah. So, of course, the German government gave me permission to do that. And I said, oh, okay. Oh, wow. Just passed it off and the guy left.
Though, that shows you that at that level of detail, and we just focus
Right.
so much on the detail, that kind of a detail could be the difference between success and failure in an operation.
And that means life and death.
Yeah. So there it is, the story of Argo.
And how did the film come about? Affleck, Clooney I know bought the rights first, but eventually it's Affleck's project.
When there was interest from Hollywood, Tony said, what this means, we have to write a book. Because Hollywood's going to mess around with this story. It's what they do. And this was a historic moment. The details should be written down. He took his 30-page operations report from the years back, and we wrote the book Argo. So when you go, it's the same material that the screenwriter for Argo, the movie, had. But he's making a movie. He's not making history. He's reinterpreting her history. So Ed Johnson, who was a major part of the operation, is out of the movie. If you saw the movie, you know without me telling you that there was no Jeep that chased that plane down the runway. Right. They add stuff, they subtract stuff. Tony Mendez had 3 kids. Only one was in the movie, depicted in the movie. The other 2 are still upset about that. The wife of Tony Mendez in the movie, they were never separated, and it wasn't me. That was his first wife who died of lung cancer some years later. They fashioned this true story into an entertainment. They still keep it a true story, but they fiddle with it on the edges, and sometimes it makes a difference.
Yeah. I'm sure the chase scene at the end ended a lot of heartbeats pumping up.
That was Tony's favorite scene.
We should also say that Ambassador Taylor came several times back to Washington asking them to go open with this story. But, he was on the Iranian death list. This is the Canadian ambassador, right? After that, and he was getting awards for what he did. Or didn't do what the agency did.
We told the Canadians, you did this. The CIA was never there. You guys take the credit. Credit is yours. Take the credit. Just don't mention the CIA. Right. And he became an American citizen.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
He became an American citizen. And
I'm sure that you lied on that application, didn't you?
We went to his memorial service up in New York when he died, and discovered what we didn't know, which was what a guy he was. Everybody loved this man. Yeah. Everybody had another wonderful story about Ken Taylor. So it was, we didn't really kind of know that part of him until afterwards, but it was fun to hear, fun to know.
And dealing with Affleck, I've read that Affleck was gracious to the family, and in fact, Tony he's on camera for a moment, right?
Yeah, there was, it was Ben Affleck's idea. The little boy in the movie, there was a picture of a little boy on his dresser, and it was actually a picture of Tony's real little boy, Ian, who had died of colon cancer months before the movie came out. And Ben said, well, let's memorialize him, and there's even in the credits, there's something about Ian, and that was just such a sweet thing to come out of Ben Affleck.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Ben was great. He was great to work with. He was gracious, and he gives the warmest hugs you'll ever receive.
And you folks went to the Golden Globes with.
We did. We went to the Golden Globes. We went to the Oscars. We went to all that stuff. I had to buy a new ball gown.
Amazing.
It was amazing. For 2 undercover CIA officers,
yeah.
you can dig that. It was amazing. It was amazing. And all of our neighbors where we lived outside of D.C., down a 1 mile. Did you ever come to our place?
No. Despite many invitations, I was never able to.
Down a 1 mile dirt road. We had 40 acres, really tucked away. No one out there knew or cared what we did. Tony was undercover the whole time. So when this came out, it was just like, it was amazing. We met all our neighbors.
Are y'all open to questions?
Sure.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. We have a microphone there, and I'm sure we have a million questions. Hello.
Hi. This is sliding
Don't
around.
touch the microphone.
Sorry. So you mentioned the scene at the end of the movie with the jeep chasing the plane, and the Iranians are seconds from catching them, and how that was a little bit dramatized.
Fake.
A little?
A little. But that's actually kind of my question. Is how far behind catching them were the Iranians actually?
You know, the screenwriter, Chris Terrio, that was his first script, and he won an Oscar for that. He said, I wanted to get that audience as excited as you were, Tony, when you were going down the runway getting ready to take off. He said, you told me that you were peeking out the windows to see if they were warming up some F-16s that we had given the Shah. He says, that's not going to do it, Tony. I had to let go full tilt. I had to get them excited. And every time we saw that movie for the first year, the audience at the end stood up and cheered. Mm-hmm. So Chris Terrio accomplished his mission, but they were worried about F-16s. That's basically what was on their mind when they they thought they were going to scramble some planes and come after them.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
But how like...
A microphone, please.
Sorry. The thing I was trying to ask was basically how close were the in real life? How close were the Iranians to actually figuring it out?
I don't think that they were close. There was a mechanical. There was another ambassador in the airport that was standing by. Another ambassador, another country, who was willing to get them on another plane if they needed to. But I don't think the Iranians were coming after them at all.
And the guards at the airport, who were depicted as being on edge and challenging, but the real story is it was so early in the morning, the guards were virtually asleep.
Which is what Tony did intentionally.
Well,
picked it
of
at
course,
like a 5 a.m.
exactly.
flight.
Yeah, that's on purpose.
Yeah. Next question.
Yes. How are we all involved with the production of the film?
We were somewhat involved. George Clooney bought it, and George Clooney was going to write it, produce it, direct it, and star in it. So it was going to be kind of a closed thing. And then he got stuck in the movie he was working on already, and Ben went muscling into Warner Brothers, and they gave it to Ben. And then things changed for us. The scriptwriter stayed with Ben, but Ben kind of shut down any window into that script. All I know, one of the things I saw when Ben took it over was the script changed, and the opening scene was going to be Tony drunk at somebody's promotion party, and
It's like I'm there again.
and I talked to him and said, why would you do that? Everybody we know, and a lot of people we don't, are to see this movie and believe it, and that's simply not true. That's kind of the last input that either Tony or I made into the movie. We went and watched them film some of it, which was wonderful, but we didn't really make any input into the script after that.
But Tony was able to take Mendez through to the CIA, through some of the CIA headquarters, right? Because Affleck talked about that.
Tony arranged to have, he was going to drive Ben out to the agency and get him in, and he did that. He set it all up. But we had an 18-year-old son at the time, and he had our son drive Ben. So it's our son, 18, just got his license. Ben Affleck. Tony's in the back seat. I was not there. And evidently they got to the gate, and there's a guard shack at the gate. And they got messed up. They got confused. And the lead car had said to Jesse, you do what we do. We stop, you stop. We go, you go. Jesse did that, but they didn't tell him to show his ID. Jesse did not show his ID, and these guys came swarming out of the shack at the CIA with their guns drawn.
Oh, dear.
Their guns drawn, and then, I don't know, maybe Ben waved or something, and they said, oh, it's him, it's him.
Do you still have the storyboards?
Pardon?
Like in the movie, they showed the storyboards at the end?
No.
No, none of those. Next question.
I've asked you both a ton of espionage questions in the past, so I'll ask the more entertaining question. If you had been cast in the movie, who would you have wanted to play you?
I can make you laugh. Jennifer Garner.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll say the same. Anyone who didn't have to go to Iran, that's what that.
I'm curious how this operation in particular influenced tradecraft going forward.
I'm not sure, did it
No.
influence tradecraft? It's simply used so many pieces of our tradecraft, and maybe we refined something based on this, but I don't think it directly influenced our tradecraft.
It didn't, but technology did.
Yeah.
Technology today, when you go to, and they're measuring your retina and doing facial recognition, is dramatically different from what it was in those days. So it's a whole new ballgame.
I have a funny story, but you have a question. You do your question, then I'll do my funny story.
I'm sure yours is better.
No.
I wanted to ask, in your opinion, what is the biggest misconception general public has about your work?
The lady on the treadmill said to me 6 months ago when she found out I worked at the CIA, she said, "Oh, with all the murderers and the assassins and she had a whole list of them in her head, and I'm just stunned that an educated woman in today's world could have those kinds of thoughts about the CIA."
Should say, yeah, but I don't work in personnel, so I don't know any of them. You can't argue with people.
Where were you
It's
when I needed you?
I get that, and we have seen some of that here over the years,
Little
and
bit.
people's responses, right? It's driven by movies.
I'm going to throw in the funny story before your question. It's short. I told you that Tony went to Iran and rescued another guy, a member of Savak. And it's in one of our books. And they're up in some attic, and they've got a light bulb hanging by a wire, and Tony's making a fake nose for this guy. He's turning him into a Jordanian so they can get him out of the country. And there's a knock on the door. Well, when Tony and the chief of station had gone into that attic space, chief of station had gone to the window and opened it and let down a rope. This was their escape plan. You always have to have an escape plan. A rope going down into an air shaft so that if somebody came through the door, I mean, it's ridiculous, but they could have gone down the rope to the air shaft. Nobody came through the door. A little kid came to the door. It was fine. But the chief of station, when he's letting the rope down into the air shaft, lost his watch. It came off. And it was a Rolex. And it dropped on a windowsill. And they could see it. But so the end of the story was they did the nose thing. They're walking down the street. They have guys with Motorola radios on each end of the block, cars waiting, engines running. Tony turns to, his name was Norb, he said, the equivalent of hold my beer, gave him whatever. Tony walks into a door that turns out to be a very low-key Iranian restaurant, walks through the restaurant, another door, walks through the kitchen, another door, walks through the laundry, walks up to the windowsill, picks up the Rolex, and brought it back to Norb and said, here's your watch. And I almost didn't believe that, except I did a talk at the Spy Museum, and that COS was in town, and I called him and I said, you want to tell that story? Because it's really a fun story. He said he was catching a flight that night, he couldn't. But that's just, that's something about grace under pressure, I think, is that Tony had scouted everything around there to know what's where, just in case.
But this type of work, as you can imagine, is a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Sir.
Wow.
I'm curious if you could share your, I understand that you were disguised in front of George H.W. Bush at one point in time, if you could share that experience.
I went into the short version, I went into the Oval Office in a disguise to brief the president. And it wasn't just a disguise, it was a full-face mask. It was animated. It was the culmination of 10 years of R&D and a whole bunch of professionals in my office who, that's a very hard thing to do, a mask that actually would move, that you could have a conversation. So I briefed the President of the United States wearing a mask, and he didn't know I was wearing it. And then I told him I was going to show it to him, and he got up and he said, hold on. He wanted to see if he could find like the edges, or he didn't know it was a mask. He didn't
He
know.
was a former director of the CIA.
CIA.
Which many people forget.
Yeah, he had been a director of the CIA, and so he said at his desk, he said, "Okay, whatever it is, take it off." And there's a picture. I have a picture holding it up in the air. I'm sitting in true face now in the Oval Office, and my head, because hair was attached to it, is in my hand in the air. And the thing that I always remember is that John Sununu, one of the people in the office at the time, hadn't been paying any attention, and he's doing notes, and he glanced up, and initially, I've got my head above my head in the Oval Office, and he let out this squeal. It shocked him. That was my moment in the Oval
So
Office.
you can see that photo that she showed in her earlier talk on our Skeptic Track on YouTube.
Oh, good.
I
Good,
am
good,
so
good.
sorry that we're out of time, but this, I have the best seat in the house. I'm telling you, it's fantastic. Thank you so much to all of you for coming and talking about this unbelievable experience. Wow. And thank you, Jamy, for getting Jonna here. I've been a massive fan of hers for years.
And I hope to see you all in 30 minutes in the Crystal Ballroom. for
Okay,
the
in just a
magic-
second,
magic
Jamy,
show.
I'm going to give y'all a second for shameless plugs.
Yeah, 30
Okay,
minutes, sure
Jamy, shameless plug, Crystal Ballroom, yada, yada, yada. Go ahead, do the thing.
I
Come on.
did it. I
Okay,
did
you
it.
already did. All right, Jonna, talk about your book, please.
I want to talk about Nick, because Nick and I we met each other yesterday,
Right.
and we haven't seen each other for 40 years, and we weren't sure we were each other. We were like,
You were holding your head up in the air.
and then I wanted to ask about his wife, who I knew very well, but of course, 40 years later, you don't know. And so I'm saying, so how's your wife?
Anyway, thank
Still
you.
my wife.
Yeah. Thank you so much for visiting with us on the Skeptic Track. The next is going to be down in the Crystal Ballroom. See you there.
Better.